Hey friends, it's Jimmy with my usual quick reminder to hit the notification bell and turn on all notifications. Also, don't forget to drop a quick comment saying where you're watching from, or what you're doing while listening, or even suggesting a historical topic. The air in the Roman Subura was often thick with the smell of flames and the stench of overcrowded tenements, a nuisance for most of the elite. But for Marcus Licinius Crassus, that smoke didn't signify tragedy so much as it represented a closing window of opportunity. It's easy to imagine him standing on a street corner, surrounded by 500 men, watching a multi-story apartment block engulfed in flames, while he calmly negotiated a price. He wouldn't lift a finger to help until the deed was signed, turning the public's worst nightmare into a private windfall. This was the foundation of a fortune so vast that it challenged the very stability of the Roman Republic. Crassus was a pioneer of a new kind of liquid diversified wealth that allowed him to underwrite the careers of legends like Julius Caesar. Ultimately, though, there was only one thing his mountains of gold and silver couldn't buy him: military glory. Rome was no longer a small Italian city-state in the 1st century BC. It had become a Mediterranean superpower, but its institutions were straining under the weight of its own success. The influx of wealth from conquests in Greece, Spain, and North Africa had created a massive disparity between the traditional landed aristocracy and the rising equestrian class. This period saw the transition from a tangible wealth based on land and loot to a more sophisticated liquid economy. Crassus stood at the center of this transformation. The economic sophistication of Rome during this era allowed for the growth of personal fortunes that would have been unimaginable to earlier generations. For example, Scipio Africanus was considered the wealthiest man of his time, yet his fortune was largely composed of physical objects taken from Carthage and Spain. By contrast, the wealth of Crassus was roughly 40 times greater than that of Scipio. Most importantly, it existed on paper as much as it did in physical gold. It was a liquid fortune, capable of being invested and moved to capitalize on political and economic shifts. This liquidity gave Crassus a level of agility and influence that his ancestors couldn't have dreamed of. The origin of the wealth that would eventually define the late Republic didn't come from steady commerce or inherited land alone. Crassus came of age during one of the most violent periods in Roman history, the conflicts between the factions of Gaius Marius and Sulla. While he was born into a patrician family of some standing, they weren't among the mega-wealthy of their class, and Plutarch notes that he was raised in relatively modest circumstances. The chaos of the Marian-Sullan conflict provided a brutal springboard for his ambitions. When Sulla emerged victorious and declared himself dictator, he initiated the proscriptions, a legal mechanism for state-sponsored slayings and asset seizure. Sulla published lists of his enemies, and anyone on those lists could be eliminated without trial, their property confiscated and auctioned off by the state at artificially low prices. While some elite Romans saw the participation in these events as barbaric, Crassus was mastering them. He recognized that the political volatility of the time created a massive depression in property values. Because the estates of the proscribed were auctioned in a climate of fear, often with few bidders willing to risk Sulla's ire, Crassus was able to snap up massive tracts of land cheap. His ruthlessness was so pronounced that rumors circulated he had added the name of a man to the proscription list simply because he coveted the man's estate. This initial capital, built on the literal blood of the Roman aristocracy, gave Crassus the seed investment necessary to build a commercial empire. While many of his contemporaries were content to let their wealth sit in static agricultural estates, Crassus turned his attention to the urban heart of Rome. The city was a tinderbox of wooden apartment blocks, known as insulae, which were built so close together that a single spark could level an entire district. Recognizing a gap in public services, Crassus organized a private fire brigade of approximately 500 men who were trained not just as firefighters, but as architects and builders. This was a stroke of genius in vertical integration. The business model was as effective as it was predatory. When a fire broke out, Crassus and his brigade would rush to the scene. He'd offer to buy the burning building and the buildings in the path of the flames. If they didn't agree, the property owners would see their investments go to nothing, with no insurance to recover from. If they did agree, they could salvage a small amount of their wealth instead. For most landlords, the logical choice was clear. He would then rebuild and rent out to the same people at higher rates, creating a constant stream of income. Notably, Crassus was also rumored to be running fire brigades in the very literal sense of the word, though this allegation was never proven. Crassus understood that wealth in the ancient world was inextricably linked to the control of labor. His portfolio wasn't limited to urban real estate. It extended into silver mines, agriculture, and a massive, highly specialized labor force. Most of those working for him weren't there voluntarily, but surprisingly, unlike most Roman elites, he took the time to train and educate these bonded laborers. He owned thousands of individuals who served as scribes, silversmiths, architects, and more. His silver mines, particularly those in the Iberian Peninsula, were another cornerstone of his financial power. Silver was the lifeblood of the Roman economy, used for the coinage that paid the legions and facilitated trade across the Mediterranean. By controlling the production of the metal itself, Crassus ensured that his wealth was tied to the very foundations of the Roman monetary system. Trying to translate his immense wealth into modern dollars is a challenge that has fascinated historians and economists for centuries. The primary ancient sources, Plutarch and Pliny the Elder, provide figures that are staggering even by today's standards. The rough estimate is 200 million sesterces, which was the equivalent to the entire annual revenue of the Roman treasury during that era. Modern economic analyses have attempted to find more relatable comparisons. Some estimates, based on the bullion value of the silver he owned, place his net worth around $167 million to $240 million in 21st century prices. However, these figures often fail to account for the vastly different purchasing power of money in antiquity. Economists observe that he had the economic power to command tens of thousands to hundreds of thousands of individuals. They've argued that this would likely make him a billionaire or even a trillionaire in modern-day terms. In the late Roman Republic, wealth wasn't just for luxury, it was a prerequisite for political survival and advancement. Crassus used his fortune as a mega-patron, building a network of influence that touched every level of Roman society. Many very influential Romans from ancient families were, relatively speaking, on the verge of constant financial catastrophe. He lent money to struggling senators and ambitious young politicians, often without interest, to secure their loyalty and votes in the Senate. His most famous investment was a young, debt-ridden gentleman named Julius Caesar. By paying off Caesar's massive debts and financing his early political campaigns, Crassus effectively bought a seat at the table of power. He used this to create a counterweight to his rival, the celebrated general and respected statesman, Pompey the Great. This relationship culminated in the formation of the First Triumvirate in 60 BC, an informal but dominant political alliance between Crassus, Caesar, and Pompey. It was a partnership of necessity. Caesar had the charisma and burgeoning popularity, Pompey had the prestige, and Crassus had the money. Through this coalition, the three men were able to bypass the traditional authority of the Senate, passing laws that benefited their private interests. Despite his unparalleled wealth and political influence, Crassus was haunted by a sense of inferiority. In the eyes of the Roman elite, true greatness was earned on the battlefield, not in the marketplace. Engaging in commerce outside of agriculture and mining was, in essence, viewed as below the station of the senatorial class. While he had successfully suppressed the revolt of Spartacus in 71 BC, much of the credit had been snatched away by Pompey, who arrived at the end of the conflict to claim glory. As Caesar began his spectacular conquest of Gaul, Crassus felt himself fading into the shadow of his two partners' military exploits. He was the man who paid the bills, but he wasn't the man whose name would be synonymous with Roman conquest. This desire to match the military reputation of Pompey and Caesar drove Crassus to seek the governorship of Syria in 54 BC. His goal wasn't just to manage a province, but to launch an unprovoked invasion of the Parthian Empire, Rome's great rival in the east. He dreamed of reaching the banks of the Indus and surpassing the achievements of Alexander the Great. It's one of history's great ironies that the man who had built a fortune on meticulous calculation would throw everything away on a campaign motivated by pure, unhinged ego. The Parthian campaign was a disaster from the outset. Crassus ignored the advice of his local allies, who were highly familiar with the terrain and Parthian tactics. The Parthians recruited heavily from the steppes and were able to field powerful horse archers, a unit that was the scourge of the pre-modern world. King Artavasdes II of Armenia, a trusted Roman client king, suggested taking a northern route through the mountains where the Parthian cavalry would be less effective. Instead, Crassus chose to march his 7 legions, totaling some 43,000 men, directly into the blistering sandy plains of Mesopotamia. He was led by a guide named Ariamnes, who was secretly working for the Parthians and lured the Roman army away from the life-sustaining river routes into a tactical dead end. In 53 BC, near the town of Carrhae, the Romans were met by a Parthian force led by the brilliant general Serenus. Although the Romans significantly outnumbered the Parthians, they were unprepared for the enemy's tactics. Serenus utilized thousands of mounted archers who were able to maintain a constant barrage of armor-piercing arrows. They were supported by a baggage train of camels carrying a seemingly endless supply of ammunition and fresh horses. The Romans, forming a defensive square, were sitting ducks. When Crassus's son, Publius, led a desperate countercharge to break the circle, he and his men were annihilated. The Parthians returned to the main Roman line with the son's head on a spear, shattering what remained of the legionaries' morale. The end of Marcus Licinius Crassus was fittingly opulent. After a disastrous attempt to retreat, Crassus was pressured by his starving and mutinous troops to enter into negotiations. During the parley, a scuffle broke out. It's unclear if it was a deliberate trap or a spontaneous misunderstanding, and Crassus was slain in the fray. His head and right hand were cut off and sent to the Parthian king Orodes II as trophies of the victory. It's here that the legend of the molten gold takes root. According to the historian Cassius Dio, the Parthians, in a mocking tribute to Crassus's legendary avarice, poured molten gold down the throat of his corpse. Other versions claim that he was alive when this happened, though this appears to have been legends building upon themselves. While many modern historians view this as a symbolic fiction intended to provide a poetic end for a man defined by greed, it has become one of the most enduring stories in Roman history. Another account, provided by Plutarch, suggests a very literally theatrical end, with his head being used as a prop in a play at a Parthian banquet. The death of Crassus was a terminal blow to the stability of the Roman Republic. Crassus had served as the essential buffer between the competing ambitions of Pompey and Caesar. With him gone, the three-headed monster of the triumvirate was reduced to 2 rivals who no longer had a reason to cooperate. The conflict that followed between Caesar and Pompey eventually led to the collapse of republican institutions and eventually the rise of the Roman Empire. The scale of Crassus' wealth remains a benchmark for historical inequality, even if modern historians can't provide an accurate modern-day figure. He proved that in the late Republic, money could buy armies, influence, and political survival, but his end served as a grim reminder that even the greatest fortune has its limits. He died in the dust of a foreign land, having failed to secure the one thing he valued more than his millions: a legacy of military honor. Hey everyone, just a quick reminder to hit that share button and send this video to your friends and family. Also, don't forget to check out the YouTube membership if you want to take your support to the next level. Imagine a plant so valuable its resin was guarded like a gold mine and its image was minted on every coin. It wasn't a rare spice or a common grain, but a wild golden-flowered herb that refused to be tamed. This was silphium, the ancient world's most coveted botanical mystery, a wonder that allegedly cured everything from a simple cough to life-threatening illnesses. It was so precious that Julius Caesar once kept 1,500 pounds of it in the Roman treasury, yet by the time the 1st century AD drew to a close, it had vanished from the earth. The story of silphium is the first recorded instance of humans driving a species to extinction through greed and neglect. The legend began in 631 BC, when Greek settlers arrived in Cyrenaica, located in modern-day Libya. They found a narrow strip of land where silphium grew wild, thriving after a mysterious pitch-black rain had supposedly soaked the soil. For centuries, the citizens of Cyrene guarded their meadows as their most vital source of revenue. This botanical fluke turned Cyrene into an economic powerhouse. Because the plant only grew in a specific 125-mile-wide region and resisted all attempts at cultivation, the Greeks held a global monopoly. They managed the harvest like a high-stakes mining operation, setting strict quotas to ensure they didn't deplete the wild population. The plant's resin became a cornerstone of trade, sold for its weight in silver. Cyrene's kings, the Batiads, grew fabulously wealthy by exporting this sap across the Mediterranean. The plant was so central to their survival that it appeared on the front of their coins, often relegated to a position higher than the gods themselves. This has led some to believe that the plant was so revered by the populace that it was actually personified and then deified. For centuries, if you had silphium, you had the riches of the world, along with the power that came with that. In the kitchen, silphium was the ultimate luxury seasoning. Stalks were roasted or boiled like vegetables, while roots were dipped in vinegar, but the true prize was the milky resin. After being tapped from the plant, the sap was mixed with flour to prevent decay and shipped in small blocks. It had a complex sulfurous aroma that supposedly left a pleasant fragrance on the breath. Medicinally, it was regarded as a miracle panacea. Pliny the Elder recorded nearly 40 remedies, suggesting it could treat indigestion, epilepsy, and even snake bites. It was used as a topical salve for wounds, a cure for sore throats, and a way to remove warts. Hippocrates even recommended it for gut issues, while others thought it could cure baldness. The plant's most famous use, however, was in reproductive health. It was highly prized as a contraceptive. Women would take a pea-sized amount of the resin once a month to prevent conception or manage their cycles. This widespread use meant that silphium was deeply connected to the themes of love and intimacy, and many historians believe this is where our modern heart symbol originated. On silver coins from Cyrene, these heart-shaped seed pods are displayed prominently, providing a visual link between the plant's biological form and its cultural meaning. Even the poet Catullus referenced silphium-bearing Cyrene, when writing about the infinite number of kisses he wanted to share with his lover. This poetic interlude highlights how the plant permeated the romantic imagination of the ancient elite. Despite its fame, Silphium's exact botanical identity remains a mystery. Since it vanished before modern science could classify it, we're left with ancient descriptions and coin imagery. It's generally agreed that the plant belonged to the genus Ferula, making it a relative of giant fennel or celery. It had a thick, grooved stalk and umbrella-like yellow flower clusters. Some scientists have proposed species like Ferula tingitana or Thapsia gumifera, but these don't quite match the medicinal potency described by authors like Pliny. Recently, a Turkish scientist identified Ferula drudiana in Turkey as a possible candidate, noting its heart-shaped seeds and unique chemical compounds. This sparked a new wave of interest, because he found it growing near ancient Greek villages in Anatolia. This suggested it may have been brought there by settlers who hoped to save it from extinction. While this find is exciting, many remain skeptical, because the plant is native to Anatolia rather than Libya. The tragedy of Silphium's extinction is a cautionary tale for our own age. When Rome took control of the region, the pressure for short-term profit began to erode the sustainable practices of the Greeks. Greedy tax farmers ignored harvest limits, while sheep farmers discovered that Silphium-fed meat was a culinary sensation. Overgrazing became a massive problem, as sheep ate the young plants before they could produce seeds. This wasn't just about overconsumption, though. Massive deforestation for agriculture and timber changed the local microclimate, leading to rapid desertification. The plant was incredibly sensitive to soil conditions and likely required a specific cycle of cold temperatures to germinate. As the landscape dried and the forests vanished, the conditions for Silphium's survival disappeared. By the time of the Emperor Nero, only one stalk remained in Cyrenaica. It was harvested and sent to him as a curiosity, marking the quiet end of a species that had once bankrolled a kingdom. It's a sobering reminder that even the most precious resources aren't infinite. While we may never taste the resin that Caesar valued more than gold, the legacy of Silphium survives in every heart-shaped token of affection we share, even if we didn't know it. It's a silent tribute to a plant that was once the pulse of an entire world.